Before we begin this morning, I know in the past week, since January, since we began this Path of Awakening practice, this 6 months dealing with the dichotomy between selfishness and selflessness, that continuum, which many of us find ourselves, not only on an ongoing basis, but we may find ourselves moving around that continuum kind of on a random basis throughout the day, depending on when we check in with ourselves. But we began in January looking at the practices of the Four Measurables, really the Buddha's teachings on how to be a loving person. And that involved, as you remember, the practice of loving kindness, of friendship, of compassion, of taking joy in the joy of others, and also the practice of equanimity, the capacity to offer these qualities of the good mind, the good heart, to everyone without discrimination. And then last week, I talked about the true meaning of spiritual community. And so before we continue on this morning, I'm wondering whether people are remembering any of this as they go through their week, and if you have any questions or anything to report about your practice. Again, we have to be very careful, even though we do meet on Sundays, that we don't begin to relate to these talks as if they're Sunday sermons, something that's just part of our week, but sort of distinct from our week. And so therefore, whatever goes on in the meditation hall or in the talk on Sunday sort of stays there. And the rest of the week we sort of continue based on our past conditioning. We want to be able to pay attention to what's being offered on a Sunday, both in terms of the practice and the teachings, but in ways that we take them in, we reflect, we chew on, and we bring them into our daily life. If we don't bring them into our daily life, then this is really, this is of minimal benefit to us. And in the same way, there are people who go to church or temple week after week after week, year after week after year, and never bring the practices, the wonderful practices and teachings they enjoy hearing on a Friday, on a Saturday or Sunday. They enjoy hearing them, but they never make the connection that it has anything to do with them and their life and their relationships and how they conduct themselves and their mind. So it's important that we don't do that here, but that we let things get stirred up. We ask ourselves when we hear teachings and practices, what does that mean to me? And what does that mean to the way I conduct my life, my relationships, and how I spend my time and energy? If we're not letting the teachings challenge us in that way, if we don't really have a very immediate encounter with the teachings, they're really, they're probably somewhat beneficial in the sense that they are probably entering our storehouse consciousness and being stored somewhere. So at least they're being stored somewhere. But if we do not take them into the more frontal lobe aspects of our mind and really engage with them, they really are not all that beneficial. So having said that, I'm wondering, does anybody have any comments or questions about the teachings and the practices that we've gone over in January and February, and how you're doing with that? Do we feel self-conscious? Do we feel a little embarrassed? Are we hoping he doesn't call on me? Sort of a replay of 4th grade. Charna? Oh. So if I ask honestly, how many people after Sunday, attending a Sunday talk, actually remember it and reflect on it at any point during the week? And don't feel embarrassed. I mean, how many people does it enter? Again, so those who haven't raised their hand, I would say, please reflect on that. Again, we're not here to be critical of each other, but we're here to learn and inspire each other. So if some of you are going, wow, that's right. I come here on Sunday, it feels good, I enjoy the talks, and then as soon as I get out of here, I'm swept away by my, the way I always do things, and life goes on until the following Sunday. You may wonder why transformation is not occurring. So please look deeply into that. And for those of you who do raise your hands, hopefully, again, good dharma, good spiritual practice should be unsettling. It shouldn't just all be sweet and nice, and it should be unsettling. It should challenge us. It should make us look more diligently into our lives and how we're conducting it, and on moment-to-moment experiences. If we're not, bringing it into the kind of every day of our life, then we're missing really what engaged Buddhism is about. Engaged Buddhism means it's not a Buddhism that only goes on in the temple, that only goes on in the books, that only goes on the talks, that only goes on when I'm online, or sitting on my cushion or whatever. Engaged Buddhism means it's engaged in my life. It's engaged in my relationship. It's engaged with when I go to work. Then it becomes meaningful. And then if the doctor gives you a medicine and says take it 3 times a day, if you want it to have therapeutic effect, and you only take it on Sunday morning, don't complain that you're not getting well. This is important. So, any comments or questions? Yes?
For me, the part of the practice that has been the most challenging...
Can you just speak up a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sorry. The part of the practice that has always been the most challenging for me is metta.
Metta?
Yes.
Because?
Well,
I don't know, that's why I'm asking you.
Well, the whole reasons why.
Yeah, but I want to know what Gary's reasons are.
Well, it's easy for people who I love and like a lot, and people who, I see as being unkind to me, or, and I create a story how they're doing it on purpose, it's about me, all that.
Right.
I have a hard time with, and I'm resistant to that. I don't want to let go of my position, sort of thing, And that it's not a frequent thing, but I'm very aware of it.
Yeah, but Gary, you just answered your question. Did you hear him in his wisdom go when he says, well, when it's people I like, which is basically people who are nice to me, or people who agree with me, people that, those people I have no problem. So to me, you don't get any points for being nice to those. There's no points for you, Gary, because that's easy. You know what I'm saying? It's easy.
Yeah.
That's like, if you want to learn to swim, doing the doggy paddle in the kiddie pond doesn't really get you anywhere. That's sort of like that, being nice to people who are nice to us. There's no credit for that. But then you spoke the truth, which is our practice is in the places that we resist. Our practice is in the places that are uncomfortable. Our practice is in the places that we say, I don't really want to do this. Or do I have to do it? That's the place that we should be practicing rather than pulling back into our comfortable little center. Okay? So this is important. I mean, when people tell me, oh, their practice is going well, everything is wonderful, I said, I don't think you're really practicing. Because we should be practicing at our edge. We should be taking our practice and taking it to that point where it gets a little uncomfortable, a little difficult, a little challenging. We want to be challenged so we can continue to unfold, continue to develop. And so Gary's acknowledging, there's a place that he's stuck. But you said it. You said, I am wedded to my position. I'm attached to my position. People who do not treat me the way I want to be treated or don't act in the way I want them to act, I personalize it. Which means I make it about me or I make it about them. And again, please notice that when we make it about me and them, I'm always the good guy, right? Have you noticed that, Gary? That you're that you're always the good guy and they're the bad guy?
Actually, my experience is a little mixed. First I'm the good guy, and then I'm mad at myself because I'm unkind to them in my mind, so I'm the bad guy.
Yeah.
So I flip-flop between the two. But yes, I start off with the position.
Yeah,
of course.
you take the position that you're right and they're wrong, you're good, they're bad. You would never do what they do, right?
Right.
Right, exactly. And then Gary says, when a little bit of clarity or rationality or objectivity enters his mind, he realizes, well, that's really distorted, right? And, which is true. But then you go the other way, which is then you start, not offering metta of loving kindness to Gary. Because he, you see, so you then do the same thing to yourself that you do to others, which is you judge yourself and you think unkind things to yourself. It is not friendship that you offer yourself at that time. Yeah, so the reason we practice loving kindness is not because we want to be good people. You know what I mean? Like there's an object. Or we're not trying to get into any special club or any special place, and our good acts will do it. We want to practice loving kindness because that is the true nature of our heart. Our heart uncontained, uncontaminated, undistorted by self-centeredness, by me-ness, by, my position. When that is removed, the heart naturally goes out. So that is we want to return to our natural state. And we call it metta, we call it loving kindness, and we turn it into a practice to identify, but also to help us return and start living in accord, which is truly natural. Young children are naturally open and friendly before they've had circumstances that have scared them or hurt them. Most young children are very open. They meet life with a smile and curiosity and interest. If you ask probably a classroom of a kindergarten or first graders, do they think killing people is good? They would probably say no. If you ask them, do you think being kind and helpful to people is good? They would say yes. And they haven't studied philosophy or morality or the world history. It is the natural inclination of the mind, heart, to be kind. Because quite simply, that's what we want, right? Right, Gary? I mean, wouldn't you like everybody to be kind to you? Wouldn't you like everybody to be kind to you whether they agree with you politically or not? Yeah. We would like the world to meet us with kindness, irrespective of our differences. And so knowing that, we obviously, it's quite natural that we would think it's, I cannot control the world and make everybody treat me the way I want, but I can certainly treat everybody else the way I would like to be treated. Isn't that the golden rule? Do unto others. So this is not, Buddhism doesn't have the corner on loving kindness. But again, I think you're right, Gary. We have to be willing, if we want to move into the world with openness and friendship, to really look deeply at that which prevents it. You know, what am I holding on to? And then you said, you're right. I'm holding on to me, to my position, right? To the way I want it to be, to the way I want them to be. And if you look at all that, I could go on and on. It's all based on this I that wants to control and manipulate the world to be the way it wants it to be. And we've got to give that one up. Because one, we cannot control and manipulate the world. And for those of you who put a lot of energy into that, how you doing? Right? How you doing? You know the answer. No matter how hard you've been working for 10, 20, 30, 40 years to get everybody in your environment and the world to be just the way you want, and expending an incredible amount of energy to make that happen, and causing all kinds of mental anguish and suffering to yourself and those you love. And that's what we've been doing. At the end of the day, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, how are you doing? Success? No. No. And if you say 100% successful, then you probably live alone. And then, of course, even when we live alone, we still have ourselves that we cannot control and manipulate into servitude. So, it is both, Gary, a positive, it is an affirmation, but it's also a training. Right? On the one hand, I would say, you know, to really 100% embrace, very consciously, how you want to be in the world. How do I want to be in the world? Do I want to be in the world with all those, with the three classes of being, those I historically like, those I historically dislike, and those I historically am indifferent to? You know, am I committed to meeting the world and every person in the world with friendship and loving kindness? Aspiration and intention come first. And that's not something, you know, we're not asking for everybody to raise their hands today, or there's no thing you have to sign. It's something that we have to wrestle with. Is this the way I want to be in the world? I mean, there are all kinds of selfish reasons for being this way, too. It does feel better. If you notice how you feel when you are with friends and you are feeling friendly, open, kind, caring, right? How does that feel, Gary?
Good.
Good. And when you're in that place of, I don't like this person, and they said this to me, and they hurt me, or they, right? How do you feel, Gary?
Bad.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that's good, because it's almost that easy, isn't it, when you stop? It goes, so just from a purely selfish point of view, we could say that having an open, kind, you know, heart feels good, much better than the other way. Not even to think about the benefit it can bring another person.
I want to be more specific, actually, as you asked me that, so I gave you quick answers.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm with people who, you know, I feel good with, and I feel relaxed and at ease. When I'm taking the other position, I'm very much aware of myself being very constricted, both in thought and in physicality. So they're very, very experiential.
Yes, and that's exactly right. Being trapped in the self and being open, right, is a very different felt experience. It's not just intellectual, it feels different. You know, when we're in our drama of self, we constrict, we tighten, physically and emotionally. It's something we can feel. The same way when we are in a state of openness and well-being, it feels different. So as you were saying.
No, that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. So that's a good check, and oftentimes we notice that first before the other. But just to conclude, and then I know. So the first thing is, do I have the commitment, do I have the attention, the aspiration to really offer loving kindness on an ongoing basis to everyone? Am I really clear about how I want to do that and go about that? And then the other thing is to be aware of, like you're saying, what are the things that cause me to pull back, right? What are the things that cause me to resist? So you really know your mind, and you know the way it distorts things, and you're ready for it. You're ready for it. Which means when you get to that point where it's like, my position versus my commitment to loving kindness and to be open. When I feel that, right, that pull, this is the historical pull, this is the aspiring pull. And spiritual practice is about learning to live a life from conscious intention, not from historical conditioning. Most people live a life based on how they've been conditioned. Childhood, growing up, this is, and which means most of the thoughts, most of the impulses, most of the reactions, most of the values have all been conditioned by the past. Real spiritual life is wanting to take your life in a, hopefully a wonderful new direction that seems to have more meaning, etc., right? And so that's conscious intention. This is history. In Buddhism, that's called karma, the law of cause and effect. What's kind of grabbing us, pushing us. This is very powerful. This is most powerful, right? Because this is where we've always been. This seems normal. This seems natural, right? This is new. And if this gets strengthened by our conscious awareness of it and our willingness to remain conscious of it in our life. We don't need to remain conscious of this. This operates on its own. So if we're not in this, this will run the show. Is that clear? It's as simple as that. So a lot of times our failure, I'm calling that failure to practice, is because one, we are not really clear about this and committed to this. and remembering and reinforcing throughout the day, this is my commitment. This is how I want to relate. But we cannot forget this guy, can we? He or she needs some help, needs some guidance, needs some socialization. Socialization skills. Big time. Because left to his or her own devices, she will carry on, he will carry on like a what? What? Like a child, right? Like a moody teenager. If anybody remembers being a teenager, anybody's raised teenagers, being a teenager is not a model of mental health. It is considered a transition time from childhood to adulthood, right? A learning time. But people get stuck here. And not only get stuck here, many of us even who aren't stuck here and have gone on into becoming more maturity in the best sense of the word, in those moments, we're back here. And we cannot see outside of this. We know that narcissism, right, is a characteristic of a very young child. It kind of is somewhat remediated somewhat when it enters elementary school or whatever. It gets a little socialized and then reemerges with great power and force in adolescence, right? Totally selfish. All it cares about is who? Itself and its friends. I mean, that's the deal. Does not see much beyond itself and its own needs and wants. Narcissism. Self-centeredness. Again, when I used to be a family therapist and worked with parents who were struggling with their adolescence, one of the, for some situations, all you could say to them is, he or she will grow out of it. Right? The main thing over these next few years, can you just not kill each other, and or else break it so far, because this is hopefully short term. But yet this part of us still lives on. And so we need to see it for what it is. Because this part of us is not only driven by its conditioning, when it's in that place, it only cares about itself. It does not even become aware that this other person who we think has ignored us or has hurt us or didn't do what we say, that they somehow could be suffering. Right? That they're human beings too. That they have their conditioning that is driving them the same way I have mine. That it's not personal. We make everything personal. And yet when we act in certain ways, we would like the person that we have hurt, or the person that we have, whatever we've done to, wouldn't we like them to understand us? Right? To really know, well, he or she really means well. They really do. But they might have had a rough day, a rough childhood, or God knows what, right? We understand. But when we're in that place where loving kindness, friendship is not the characteristic of our heart, we don't want to acknowledge that the other person is a human being who also is controlled by their condition, who also has their suffering, who also are less than perfect. Anybody here less than perfect? Yes. Anybody ever here ever screw up royally? Yes. Anybody here ever been, even though you have good intentions, been unkind to another human being? Not understanding, not patient, not loving, not accepting. And yet we are outraged when somebody else acts that way to us. Right? That's why it is said in the teachings, we are sick. We are not healthy in our minds. But luckily we have good medicine, good Dharma medicine that we can take, like the practice of loving kindness, like the practice of compassion. So we can take some good medicine so we can get healthy. Yes. Questions? Yes. Yeah, you? What's your name?
My name's Chrissy.
That's right, Chris.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
My work environment is very competitive. If you were to ask me what we were competing for, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you exactly. There's very much every man for himself type of energy and attitude. And loving kindness, compassion is something that I have been working very hard on for over a year now, in trying to treat others as I would like to be treated. And to be honest, this has not served me well in that environment. It's almost seen as a weakness. And then I have my own mental positions about being upset that that is not reciprocated. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So I just have a hard time reconciling that loving kindness with, I've accidentally, made myself a doormat. I don't know how I created this situation for myself, but I did.
I appreciate that that question. That's very important. Repeat the question. So Christy's saying that she works in, I guess, what she considers a fairly competitive environment. People are not very nice to each other. People sort of, everybody's watching out for themselves. And so Christy says, I've been trying to take these practices with loving kindness, et cetera, and I think all I've done is turn myself into a doormat. It has not served me well. So she says, on one hand, it hasn't served her well, and two, she said, well, at the very least, I would have liked to seen some reciprocation. So even if it didn't serve me well in terms of the job, at least, I saw it was a little nicer. And it hasn't even happened. I mean, no, it's like nobody's even noticed, or nobody cares. So what's going on? It's like somebody not too long ago came to me because they also had a similar environment where it was kind of a servicing with, there'd be tips to get. And, if you were very nice, then everybody else would be, after the big tippers, waiting on the big tippers and everything else. And you would find yourself at the end of the day kind of hurting financially because you were not stepping up for yourself in that sense. So it was a kind of a similar, a little different,
Yeah, similar.
So again, we have people like Gandhi, we have people like the Buddha, we have people like Martin Luther King, other people, great apostles of nonviolence, right? Of really loving kindness, if not in action. And my thought when I mentioned those four names is none of them held a full-time job. And I think that is that's something just to be aware of. Okay? So, in certain realms, our activity can be pure. And I think when we talk about that in its most abstract sense, whether it's nonviolence, whether it's loving kindness, compassion, in its 100%, it is quite wonderful. But in the practicality of life, it has to be conditioned by common sense and reality. Oftentimes, when we talk about these kinds of teachings and acceptance, obviously, the other thing that often people bring up to me, of course, is, well, what if you're an abused woman in an abusive situation? I mean, how far does understanding, compassion, understanding the causing conditions that's causing this person, I mean, does this mean that you're a doormat? And obviously, no. So it's interesting in Buddhism, which to me is a very sophisticated body of knowledge and teaching. Not only are there the teachings, right, which we're talking about, but then there is that's called, we call that the wisdom side. But then the other side, which is considered equal, which is the word is upaya, which means skillful means, which has to do with implementation, you could say. And what it says in terms of implementing all this wonderful stuff is, on the upaya side of things, it has to be, there are like two main characteristics that need to be assessed. One is appropriateness, And the other is then, let's say, so appropriate means what is appropriate for the situation. Right? What is appropriate for the situation? So if you're, let's say you are, you're in a competitive situation. Let's say you're racing. Right? Now, obviously, if you are a professional or an amateur runner, right, entering into competitions, being a nice woman and letting everybody else win, can you see it's kind of like that maybe you should just jog, right? You see what I'm saying? So, if you're in that environment, then obviously that's the environment you're in, and your response has to be appropriate for the environment. Right? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Now, in context of that, you see, in the context of being, let's say, in a competitive environment, let's say sports is very competitive, right? For most people. Again, on the one hand, you have people who are super competitive, super egoistic, and it's all about me, and they'll do anything they can to win. You don't have to be that person. And then you don't have to be the person that lets everybody else go first. So your challenge is, in terms of the situation that I'm in, which means reality of the situation and who I'm dealing with, what would be an appropriate and skillful way to bring the practice of loving kindness into that environment? Does that kind of give you a little more room? If I'm in an abusive situation, and I can have great understanding and sympathy and compassion for my abuser because I know they were abused and all this, but still, I don't want to live with them anymore. Right? When you say that, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, see, because what these teachings are about, it's I don't have to hate this person. I don't have to want to harm this person. I don't have to do harm to this person. Because I understand that they're another human being who is just a product of their conditions, and they don't even see it. But at the same time, I'm also charged with a mission to, like you're charged with a mission to keep Chrissy safe, and to make sure she earns a decent living. You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's part of your deal too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have to, you see. So there's a balance. And if you're saying, I'm going to bring the teachings of nonviolence and loving kindness and compassion 100% into my workplace, well, then you got to live with this. You got to live with being a doormat.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with people who don't get it. Right?
Right.
They don't get it. I mean, if you got a job, working in the tiger house at the zoo, would you go in there and start petting them? Nice kitty. I mean, would you blame the tiger if he or she bit off your head? No. Who's at fault? Yeah, because you were what?
Unskillful.
Unskillful, and you couldn't see the reality of the situation and act appropriately. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you're saying I work in an environment with, how would you describe it?
I said competitive.
Competitive.
Or, well, very selfish.
Selfish,
Yeah.
competitive. Yeah, I don't know if everybody is that way, but let's say that's generally how it is, and that's the culture.
Well, that's what's rewarded.
Right. So that's.
I mean, I can see that they're just doing what they got to do.
Right. And again.
But I'm afraid that if I go in that direction, then I'm just kind of perpetuating that. I don't know. I thought it had to be either or.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be either or, but again, there are choices. I mean.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you know, again, there's personal stuff. I mean, Chrissy could say, gee, I don't want to be in those kind of environments at all. Let me see if I can find a job where things are different. I don't know if those places exist, but they may be places, or it's less like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but again, we don't always have choices. It depends on our situation in life, financially, and otherwise, whether we have options. If we have options, that could be an option. I mean, if you look at in the Buddhist tradition of monks and nuns, right, they look at our society and their response is what? I want out. I don't want to just do it better as a householder. I want to get out of the whole thing. I don't want to have a job, I don't want to have a house, I don't want to have a mortgage, I don't want to have to deal with all this stuff. And I just want to have a quiet, meditative, spiritual life. So I don't want to be even around those kind of people. I mean, that's a choice. Some people may say, I don't know, I can't stand this urban environment, everybody rushing around, everybody busy, I mean, just I want to move to the country. But again, if your choice is to stay, the wonderful challenge you have is how can I be in that environment, but not become like the others. So if you are a professional athlete or something, how can you give it your all? Not because you want to, show everybody else up or beat everybody else, but because it's coming from your inside that this is, you want to put forth your most concerted energy. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't, and even though the people on the other side of you could be very competitive and, all about them, you don't have to be. But at the same time, inwardly you don't have to be, but outwardly you could be just running as fast as them, if not more so, and trying to win. But it's for different reasons. This is important. Because why? Because we live in a culture where most of these values that I'm talking about are not supported. Right? I mean, you could say that your work environment tends to be a very highly, but we know our culture does put great emphasis on what? Individuality, getting ahead, individual getting ahead, competition is good, be the best, be on top. Right? I mean, that's the culture. And so, each of us have a decision to make, living in that culture, how we want to relate to it, if we decide to stay in it. And the question is, how can I relate to it? How can I live in it and live according to my own values? And yet understand that living in it involves a compromise. I can't be pure, can I? So this is a very important issue of spiritual practice, especially for people like us. We are lay people, and we live in an urban environment. Right? And we work, and not everybody at work shares our values. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
I think the problem that Christy has described is integral to all of our practice, in the sense that the institution of work in our society is a tough one that we all have to encounter. I don't think there's another institution in my mind in our society that creates more neuroses than the work environment. It just seems unnatural to our existence as beings. But we have to conduct ourselves in this unnatural institution by default because we have to earn an income. That being said, I think the way Christy has described her behavior in that work environment seems to be expressing Buddha nature and a path of the Bodhisattva that is admirable. And if just one individual were to glean that information, her example has been a beacon to that individual. It just seems to me that isn't that the whole basis of our practice is to expound that Buddha nature in every moment of our existence, whether it be at work, at play, at something. And I think that's a very admirable approach to dealing with problems at work. And sometimes we won't be acknowledged or admired for it, but it seems to be expressing a true heart.
Yeah, again, so just so I can repeat it. So what Michael is saying, he's saying, but hold on a second. I mean, what Chrissy is saying and the way she is, not buying into the competitive environment, and even if people step all over her and get ahead, the fact that she's meeting that with equanimity and not saying anything, isn't that what practice is about? Isn't that the expression of our true nature? Isn't that admirable? Good for Chrissy. Am I quoting you right?
Yes, except the doormat metaphor is something I think that we may conjure up in our own mind as far as other people reflecting on us and our behavior. To me, that doormat can very well be a firm foundation as well as something that people are cleaning their feet on. And I personally take pride in being a doormat in that situation.
So, Michael, standing up for doormats, I appreciate it. And saying the path of the doormat is a spiritual path. Again, I would say to Michael, it's a matter of individual choice. It's a matter of individual choice. And, again, we know, just in our own history, let's say, of civil rights, we know there were some people who were willing to get severely beaten up and did not ever resort to violence at all. And did their best in their hearts to love the person who was beating them. That is a deep expression of nonviolence, of which very few people are capable. And I think it's up to each individual in that situation to decide whether that's something that they can do. In the same way, in all kinds of situations where people are being met with aggression or violence, to be able to meet them with unrestricted nonviolence and love is a very high bar. I remember when I first met Thich Nhat Hanh, he said a very interesting thing. I forget what we were talking about. But he said, when you have two generals at war, leading their troops, and one takes into account civilian casualties in planning his military campaign, takes into account civilians, and you want to take that call? So he said, you have these two generals, each planning a military campaign, which is basically, there's nothing more violent than a military campaign. Its purpose is to kill. But he said, if one general does it just, hell-bent, and the other one is much more cautious and careful about minimizing civilian casualties, he said that second general is more nonviolent than the first, which is interesting. So we can make absolutes. I think it's an important call.
Yes.
So again, it's a personal choice. I mean, if one chooses to take that position that I am just here. I will generate loving kindness and compassion and understanding and total acceptance in every situation, and will use that as a vast teaching to free myself of all attachment to self. That's good. If one really does that, and one really has a full heart and an empty heart and a loving heart at all times. But that's again a high bar. And Yeah, I mean, that's what, I think that what makes spiritual practice so wonderful. That it's not absolutes. It is something that we live. And we have to live it in ways that are true to ourselves. Right? Because obviously Chrissy tried that way and going, it doesn't feel right to me. Right, Chrissy? I mean, that's what I hear you saying. You wouldn't be asking the question. There's something
Yeah,
not...
exactly.
It's just, and that's Chrissy's got to be in touch with herself. Kind of where she is and what... And so you begin where you're at and you work yourself in the direction of where you want to go. But again, everyone's different in how they want to apply the teachings. I think the important thing is not to have absolutes and to be willing to work with the gradations, the grade of life. Things aren't always clear. Things aren't always simple. And you know, like if you take, and again, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying, but if you take, for example, the doormat thing, and you say, so let's say you're in an abusive relationship and you're the person being abused and you decide to use that situation to let go of all your attachments to yourself, and just no matter what the abuser does, just to generate loving kindness, understanding, and acceptance to them. That may be an interesting exercise in your own personal development, but is that really the best thing, compassionate thing for that person? See, that's another issue. What am I teaching that person? What are they learning from this situation? I mean, it could be that in Chrissy's situation, those people are just learning, you know, egoism and competitiveness, and who always wins. The strong, right? The strong shall win. And the weak better look out. That's just the way it is. It's a jungle out here. So, you know, sometimes when the doormat stands up for themselves and says, you can't do this. This is wrong. And there are consequences for you doing this, such as I'm leaving you or I'm going to have you arrested. That may be very beneficial for that person, the perpetrator. Because they are out of control and they are living from their absolute egoism and all their own violent tendencies. And so it may not be that person will be moved by loving kindness, by softness. You know, in Buddhism, in the teachings on compassion, it's very interesting. Especially in Tantric Buddhism, you see this highly developed. But you see on the side of these enlightened deities, half of them are beautiful. They're very angelic and sweet, and, you know, have all the qualities that we like in Buddhists. The other are wrathful. Big ugly faces, and extra eyes, and you know, they wear skull they wear skull necklaces. They drink blood, and these are also considered emanations of the bodhisattva of compassion. Some people need a 2x4 upside their head before they get it and stop doing suffering to other people, and that's the truth. Some people are so far on this side, unless they are stopped. Now, because again, all they see with the soft side of life is another somebody to take advantage of. Now, this is the key thing, right? The wrathful deity is an enlightened being, which means they're not doing it because they're angry, they're not doing it because they want to hurt, they're not doing it to get back at. They're doing it because they actually see this suffering person. That's even though they think they're great and they're the perpetrator, that they are essentially suffering and they're caught in their own delusion and conditioning. And my question is, how can I help them get out of it? See, that's the challenge. So when you see it, when you see compassion See, in Buddhism, compassion does not mean empathy. Empathy just means I feel somebody suffering. In Buddhism, the word karuna implies I want to alleviate that suffering. You know, if you're in relationship to someone who's an addict, who is continually doing harm to themselves and others in their lifestyle, the most compassionate thing when they ask you to give them some money for drugs is not to give them money. And when they say, but I'm suffering, I haven't had my fix in 12 hours and I'm suffering in body and mind, the most compassionate thing is to say, good. Because what you're doing in life is causing suffering. And you've got to get yourself out of it. Now that may sound harsh, right? But that may be the most compassionate thing you can do to help that person. So oftentimes taking the under position, the down position, if it is, you know, I agree that in many circumstances we have to let go of our need to win and to be right and to really be willing to let others go first. Huh? Let others go first. You know, I'll be in the back of the line. That's fine. I don't care. It's good for me. Because I have that, I like to be in the front of the line. I like to be first. So it's good for me to be last. It's good for me to care more that you get waited on ahead of me. That's good for my practice. So I think in many ways taking that down position is very good for our spiritual practice. But I think in certain circumstances, like we're talking about, it is not helpful to that person who's perpetrating. And there are many people like this. And the key thing, of course, is how even when I have to act in a wrath. I mean, people here are parents, right? Anybody here ever raise a teenage child? Did you ever have to be a little wrathful with them? And the key was, how can you be wrathful and not really, it's not about self, it's not about me. It's just that this is appropriate for the situation. They need a loud, firm no. Because being nice to them doesn't work. You know, I've tried the nice way, it doesn't work. They don't get it. They're lost in their own egocentric whatever. So, being a compassionate individual is interesting. It doesn't always mean I have a smile on my face and sweetness. Sometimes it means I can put a wrathful face on and a strong voice. But again, it's in the service of alleviating somebody's suffering. Thank you. And last but not least,
I just, a few weeks ago I was at a retreat and I asked a similar question about, it was very different context. I really don't know what Gary's, the specifics of Gary's conversation, specifics of electricity, but I was talking about a relationship, my ex-wife, and I asked the teacher, what's a balance between the compassion to them and compassion for myself? At what point do I become a doormat? Am I not having compassion for myself? Not to contradict anything that you said, but something that I thought would be interesting to everyone. It certainly was interesting to me. I don't think Bhante would have been suggesting that if somebody who gets beat by their husband should stay with them until they die. But he said to me, it's very interesting. He said, you people, and you said doormat, you talk this great insults in your country. So we have the same expression in my country, but it's a compliment. You just call someone a doormat. It's one of the highest forms of praise you can give them. That struck me as very interesting. And so I have tried to ask myself, like, is it really a problem? You know, is what this person is asking of me, is it really a problem? I mean, is it really what, and usually when I look at it deeply, like, yeah, not really. It's not that big a deal. You know, be at the end of the line. It's just my ego push things forward. People around me saying, "Oh, you shouldn't let them get away with that. You should fight them." Usually, when I fight them, it just makes things worse. And then they retaliate, and everybody starts suffering. If I go along and I look at their reasoning for something, then maybe they're asking me to.
Right. So again, just to wind up, again, this is what we've been talking about. Which again, they're all different circumstances, and everybody has to answer essentially for yourself and how you want to deal with the circumstances and how you want to assess it. And obviously, there are certain circumstances where the grievance or the violence or the control and manipulation is clearly excessive. And there are many times where it really is, Gary said, just our own personal stuff. And one has to, that's what practice is about, is looking deeply into that. Again, we look for absolutes, and there are no absolutes. Unless one lives in an absolute environment. In words, words are easy, but life is much more complex. And so, again, it's our own assessment of each situation, and like you say, how much is my own ego holding on, creating conflict, because I stand apart, and how much of this is a situation truly, way out of balance, and it's for the well-being of the whole situation that some assertion of my own position, quote unquote, needs to be asserted. And again, the challenge is, how can I assert without anger, without hatred, without judgment? And that's really what the practice. It's really about your heart. The action, you are to be skillful. What is skillful for this situation? And situations in relationship have to do with both sides. To see the other side. To understand the other person's point of view. That's important. So anyhow, these are interesting issues. And again, at the end of the day, it's we want to do the least harm, we want to do the most good, and that is our inspiration, that is our intention, and yet the capacity to see the situation as clearly as we can, to not see the situation in terms of me, my needs, my wants, my desired outcome, etc. But how do I bring these values into the situation, see the point of view of all the players, which includes mine, and come forth with an action, with an intervention, with a response that is most meaningful and helpful. The less self there is, the less self-projection onto the situation there is, the easier for clarity and insight and understanding and compassion to be present. So again, it all comes back to where we began. Learning to sit with an empty mind, free of all discrimination. To learn to sit with a mind that is no longer positing a self as opposed to the world. And to be able to experience your body and your breath just as it is. To be able just to walk with just walking. That is how one learns how to live in reality and live cleanly in the situation and not endlessly live in our own projections, thoughts. Life is much easier when it's lived at a much more elemental basis. And that is what the practice is really about, to bring us back, to bring us home, not endlessly living in our mental projections, not endlessly living in the world of self, with all its dramas and melodramas. So we'll stop.